Welcome to Random Movie Reviews. I'm Nathan, and today I'll be talking about Punch Drunk Love. So here we are in the month of February, Valentine's Day month, a holiday that I don't think anybody really likes. I certainly never cared for it, and that's never really changed whether I'm in a relationship or not in a relationship. But it does give me the excuse to try to look for movies that are outside of your average romantic comedy films. I think I mentioned this both during my Love Actually review, a movie that I loathe, and my When Harry Met Sally review, a movie that I absolutely love, in that I am much more picky when it comes to romance movies than I am with any other genre. Like, because I love action, science fiction, and horror, there's a ton of movies that are in those genres that could be considered guilty pleasures because I just like that genre. I like those genre conventions and the cliches in those genres, where with rom-coms, when you watch a cliche rom-com, it's just like, it's agonizing for me. I absolutely hate it. But when a romantic movie is done well, and the romance in the movie feels genuine and sincere and earnest, and happens to avoid many of those genre cliches, it's like finding a gem, a diamond in the rough, if you will. And I can't think of a better movie that exemplifies that than this film right here, Punch Drunk Love, a movie that I find myself coming back to time and time again. It's just one of those movies where it's like, you know what, I haven't seen it in a while, I want to rewatch it, and then my love for it is just as strong as it was the first time I saw it. And it's also one of those movies that keeps growing on me, even though I pretty much loved it from the very first time I watched it, because there is no other movie that is like this movie. And you can say that about a lot of Paul Thomas Anderson movies, PTA, which is how I'll be referring to him from here on out. You know, you look at movies like Magnolia, Boogie Nights, There Will Be Blood. All of those movies are so unique, and, you know, sure, they have some comparisons to other films and filmmakers that PTA is an admirer of, but they still feel wholly original and unique. And he's also one of those filmmakers that never makes the same movie twice. And as far as his later stuff goes, which I'm not really a big fan of, I didn't really care for The Master, and I don't really care for what was that one movie? Inherent Vice. I was going to say Infernal Affairs. No, that's a Hong Kong crime movie that I'm actually a big fan of. Yeah, those are movies that didn't really connect with me, but the ones that I mentioned, like this movie, Boogie Nights, There Will Be Blood, Magnolia, those are all movies that I'm really, really a big fan of. But Punch Drunk Love is rapidly jumping the list in terms of being my favorite PTA film. It kind of goes back and forth between that and Boogie Nights for me, but this is kind of the movie that keeps on giving. And it's a movie that's gone on to have a little bit of a cult following, considering the fact that this is kind of the first film that established Adam Sandler as more of a dramatic actor, even though that this movie is still very funny. There's a lot of humor in this movie. It's very romantic. It's very strange, very quirky, very off-kilter, very anxious. There's a lot of ways to describe this movie, and I kind of mentioned that in my Letterboxd review, which I think I'll end up reading. But before I do that, let me just give a brief plot synopsis of this movie for those who may not have seen it yet. So Punch Drunk Love revolves around the character of Barry Egan, who owns a company that creates novelty toilet plungers. And he's a very anxious and emotionally withdrawn individual due to his 7 overbearing sisters who constantly ridicule him, bully him, emotionally abuse him. And because of this, he's a very anxious, sad, isolated individual who has difficulty connecting with other people. But then one day he ends up meeting a woman. He first meets her at the very beginning of this movie when she has her car pulled up in front of his business in order to wait for the mechanic shop to be open. And then they end up meeting later on when he finds out that this is the woman that is a co-worker of one of his very evil and berating sisters. We're going to talk about the sisters in this movie. It's a very interesting dynamic. And for the first time, from what we understand in his life, he starts to experience love. He starts connecting with this person on a level that he's never connected with anybody, period. Throughout the movie, we see his character change very dramatically by experiencing a new love and a new relationship that he's never had before. And the side plots in this movie revolve around Barry finding out that there is a marketing mistake with Healthy Choice products that promote frequent flyer miles, but there was an error where the consumer would get so much more miles by purchasing a lot of pudding, which I guess was something that was inspired by a true story. So he's collecting all of this pudding that gets a bunch of frequent flyer miles, a ton. And he doesn't really know why he's collecting this at first, but he sees collecting frequent flyer miles as being a form of currency. He doesn't know what it's going to be for yet, but he's taking advantage of this. And then we know that because Barry is so lonely and isolated, as he's cutting out flyers to get pudding, he ends up coming across a sex phone hotline that he ends up calling just to find some form of companionship. It isn't for sex or anything like that at all. He's genuinely a lonely person. And that is a really interesting scene. But he ends up getting in a lot of trouble when he gives too much information to the phone lady, which ends up being a whole scamming operation run by Philip Seymour Hoffman in Utah, who is a mattress store owner, while also running this sex phone scam on the side. He ends up getting these brothers to go after him to scam him out of a bunch of money. And there's a lot of moving pieces in this movie. The plot is kind of all over the place, but it all culminates with this beautiful relationship at the core of the movie that's really there to display this incredible character development that we see in Barry. And it is a beautiful movie that is, like I said, it's unlike any other movie I've ever seen. But before I get into the details, let me just read my Letterboxd review that I think does a good job of explaining my reaction to watching this movie for the first time. Punch Drunk Love is one of those special movies that you could describe in what feels like a million different ways. The film is altogether funny, angry, beautiful, romantic, awkward, anxious, absurd, frenetic, heartbreaking, and heartwarming. But by the time the film reaches its climax and we see how our lead character Barry Egan concludes his arc, the immediate adjective that comes to mind when describing this film for me is triumphant. Punch Drunk Love is essentially a character study of a very emotionally broken down man who discovers love for the first time in his life. And because of that love, he's able to overcome all of the obstacles and struggles that have plagued him throughout his life. He overcomes the emotional abuse from his 7 sisters, he overcomes the phone sex scam he gets trapped in, and he overcomes his fears of meeting someone new because of how closed off he is from the world due to his emotional and mental hang-ups. But through the new love he discovers from one of his evil sister's co-workers, Lena, Barry can now triumph over all of his struggles. Adam Sandler's performance in this film is simply extraordinary. The entire cast is great, but Sandler in particular is truly something special. Punch Drunk Love is often credited as being the first film to show off Sandler's dramatic chops as an actor, and because of that, Sandler has gone on to do various other dramatic films, but for my money, this film still ranks as being his very best in terms of a lead performance. Paul Thomas Anderson has one of the most diverse and amazing filmographies of all time, so picking a favorite PTA film is by no means an easy task, but Punch Drunk Love is one that ranks very highly with me, and it just might be my favorite of his. I can confidently say that there is no other movie like Punch Drunk Love. It is, in every sense of the word, an original film that is tailor-made for hardcore fans of unique cinema. Yeah, it was one of those movies where after I got done watching it, I was just left buzzing because it gave me so many different emotions. It made me feel joy, it made me feel heartwarming, but it also made me feel quite anxious and uncomfortable. I think, you know, as somebody who definitely suffers from social anxiety, there's a lot of scenes in this movie where it's like, oh man, that almost hits too close to home, where like just watching Barry, you know, struggle with maintaining his work life while also dealing with his overbearing sisters and also just trying to have a normal conversation with people, and him always being on edge, him always being uncomfortable and self-conscious about what he's saying, what he's doing. There's just a lot of that resonates a lot with me, as I'm sure it does with many, many people. But then you see his character gain a lot of confidence, a lot of strength, a lot of self-assurance that he's never had before by finding this new love with Lena, played by Emily Watson, who is great in this movie as she is in everything I see her in. And the love that these two characters share is, much like the rest of the movie, completely unique and unlike anything I've seen in any other romantic film ever. It's totally just so original that it's like when you first watch it, it like catches you off guard. It's like, I've never seen anything like this. The filmmaking on display is, you know, it's a PTA film, so of course it's visually stunning. The use of color in this movie is very, very specific and very unique. There's a lot of visual motifs here, specifically with the colors of blue and red. You notice that in the beginning of this movie, Barry is wearing a very blue suit, like the bluest suit anyone could wear. It's a very strange color to choose to wear a suit for, but it's clearly meant to represent the isolation and loneliness and depression and possible self-loathing that Barry experiences on a daily basis due to his tragic background of being the only male in a female-dominated family, and these 7 sisters are just the worst. The way they talk to Barry, the way they treat him like shit, and then that scene where, you know, he decides to go to Hawaii, he wants to see Lena again, he gets on the phone, and he's like, listen, he talks to the coworker sister that is friends with Lena about getting her number for the hotel. She's giving him shit, and then there's that great scene where he just lets her have it.
What do you want her number for?
Don't do this to me.
What do you want her number for?
All I want is her number. Can you help me out?
Tell me why. Do you like
There's
her?
no reason for you to treat me this
You
way.
like her?
You're killing me. You're killing me with the way you
God.
are towards me.
Oh,
All I
God.
want is the fucking number. That should be goddamn good enough for you. Now give me the fucking number.
He really goes off, and it's a very cathartic moment. And then right after that, he goes back to being sweet, optimistic Barry because he's found this new woman. And she wears a red dress that kind of complements, a very red dress that complements his very blue suit, and the red obviously representing love. And throughout the movie, there are numerous scenes where we see red in contrast with blue. It's something that I noticed even more watching the movie a second time. There's a lot of little subliminal things in this movie that you can pick up on that PTA wants you to try to find the meaning of for yourself. He's one of those filmmakers where he really believes in showing the audience and not telling them. The beginning of this movie is it sets up the rest of the movie perfectly in terms of tone and in terms of themes. So in the beginning of the movie, Barry is on the phone. He's discovering about these frequent flyer miles promotion with Healthy Choice and how the benefit that he would end up getting from this, and that's probably an error with the company. And so he's talking on the phone about it. And then he goes outside, and then we see a horrific car crash. And then we see somebody put what looks like a small piano, but is a harmonium, out on the street, and then they just drive off. And so we see a car crash, and there's a lot of scenes in this movie that feel like a car crash, like an emotionally anxiety-ridden scenes, like the scene where he goes to the sister's party, and they're berating him, giving him shit, and then he freaks out by punching out the sliding glass door. And then he talks to one of the husbands about wanting to talk to a psychiatrist because he's dealing with a lot of emotional turmoil because of this. That scene feels like a car wreck. And there's other scenes in there that also kind of feel like a car wreck. And then the harmonium, which is very important throughout the movie, is like a representation. I'm still trying to figure that one out. It could be representation of Barry discovering something that can help him deal with his inner turmoil. It could be the representation of love. It could be the representation of him trying to fix himself because the harmonium is kind of damaged. He's also learning how to play it. Could that possibly represent Barry trying to learn how to deal with the complex emotions that he's feeling within himself and learning how to connect with other people? Who knows? But that's one of the many things that makes this movie so rewatchable, is that you end up getting something new out of it every time. Like, I remember the second time I watched this movie, I noticed that when Barry got really upset figuring out that he wouldn't get the frequent flyer miles as soon as he expected, he has to wait 6 to 8 weeks for it. He very violently punches the wall, and then he puts his hand on the harmonium, and you notice on his knuckles it says love. There's a lot of these little subliminal, hidden, almost Easter egg type of things throughout the movie that is giving you hints about what this movie is really about. It almost feels like a Rubik's Cube in a way that PTA wants you to solve in order to unlock the true meaning of this movie. And it's just so amazingly well made and thoughtful, and there's a lot of humor in the movie. There are moments that are quite funny because of how absurd and strange they are. And when this movie is romantic, it is genuinely one of the most romantic things ever. It's a movie that, like, by the time it ends, it fills my heart with joy. The first half of this movie, I'm really anxious. I'm on the edge of my seat. If I'm feeling uncomfortable, I'm kind of squirming because I relate to Barry in so many ways in terms of him dealing with anxiety. And then when we get through the second half of this movie and we see the relationship between him and Lena Blossom, we see him get the courage to stand up for himself and take charge by beating up the brothers that were harassing him for money, and by also confronting Philip Seymour Hoffman in Utah face to face, explaining to him that he has a new love in his life that gives him more power and strength than he could ever imagine. And it is the perfect movie for the month of February if you're looking for a romantic movie that is completely the opposite of most cookie cutter, basic, forgettable bullshit rom-coms that your girlfriend will probably make you watch and you'd be like, I'd rather watch anything else. I highly recommend this movie if you're looking for something that is completely different, but also delivers in terms of telling a romantic story that feels so earnest and so sincere and just genuinely beautiful in every single way. So that's my thoughts on Punch Drunk Love. I adore this movie. It really is one of my favorite movies of all time. I know I say that a lot on this channel, but what can I say? I like to talk about movies that I adore, which is why I wanted to talk about this one today. But I want to hear from you guys. What are your thoughts on this movie? If you've seen it, do you love it? Do you hate it? Mention it in the comments below. Also mention to me some other alternative romantic or rom-com movies that you feel like kind of fall into this vein of quirky, off-kilter rom-coms. Mention it in the comments below. And as always, thank you guys for watching.